So this means we're friends, right? By Paisley Wraith, Chapter 3. Kyle turned over his paper once he was done writing, resting his chin in his hands afterwards. They'd get to compare ideas with a partner once everyone was done. Normally, this was a reason for him to hate this kind of in-class assignment, but he really looked out with partners in this class. He glanced at Kenny, who was chewing on his pencil as he read over what he'd scribbled out. The concentrated, thoughtful expression was cute on him. He didn't get to see him focused often. Kyle looked over the rest of the class, not even half done yet. Next to him, Kenny added more words to what he already had, underlining something twice. The kid loved psychology, and with Kyle's law career and Kenny's criminology, both of them were required not only to take this, but a couple sociology classes as well. It was nice to have someone around. Kyle hadn't realized how isolated he'd become since he moved away from home. Kenny was good company. Kyle found it difficult to feel lonely with a bright ray of sunshine constantly attached at his hip. Said boy leaned slightly to reach Kyle's paper, and the boy arched an eyebrow at him as he drew a crooked, sad little heart in the corner. Kenny grinned, pleased he had his attention. He slid his paper over to Kyle, despite the teacher not telling them to do so yet. Kyle went along with it, feeling just a bit smug that he was starting to recognize the reasoning behind the actions when it came to the blonde. Kenny got bored in class easily and started losing interest the moment things got too quiet or people derailed the conversation. Kyle believed Kenny was incredibly smart, despite his protest that his grades were only so-so. As long as the teacher was talking about something that interested him, Kenny paid apt attention and recalled information. Honestly, Kyle spent a little too much time in class analyzing Kenny, as much as the study material, but he couldn't quite make himself quit. Kyle looked over his thoughts on the excerpt they read. Kenny's analytical and careful commentary focusing on environmental factors as influences. He was a big believer in nurture over nature, someone's upbringing and localized environment over genetic factors or predispositions. Kyle read over it, marking parts he wanted Kenny to talk over or explain. This kid was so smart. He had an outlook on things that fascinated Kyle, this entirely negative outlook, yet Kenny's disposition made him constantly move on rather than linger. Kenny was a believer that most people were not good people. Yet he constantly gave people a second chance, or the benefit of doubt, almost contrary to what he said. Kenny was fascinating, a vibrant, striking personality, the sun itself in Kyle's palm. He could not be more thankful he'd lost his way the first day of class in the beginning of the semester. It gained him a date eventually, a few dates. Funny thing about that, Kyle had once resigned himself to be alone forever. He didn't look for anyone, particularly after meeting Mysterion, which he was lately refusing to think about. Kenny snuck up on him, offered genuine friendship, never pushed, and let Kyle make the decision himself. He didn't think he'd fall for somebody this quickly before. As if he'd known Kenny for ages, he just fit in his life perfectly. He was still musing on that during lunch when he took the cold day to sit outside in the sunlight overlooking campus on the main building. The restaurant inside had a balcony, and considering the chill in the air, no one else was out there. Someone kissed Kyle on the top of the head from behind and set his lunch in front of him. Kyle smiled at Kenny, having already gotten their drinks before sitting down. The blonde plopped into the seat next to him, looking over the football field. "You look in deep thought," Kenny said carefully, attacking his sandwich. "What's up?" "Nothing, just spacing out," Kyle said, not about to rattle off everything he'd been thinking about him. They weren't that far into the relationship yet. This had only just started. Let's not scare Kenny off before they'd been together 2 weeks. "You work tonight?" "Yep," Kenny said, relaxing against the back of his chair. "As usual." "Oh!" he said, sitting up so abruptly that his chair made a horrifying squawk against the concrete. "I forgot to tell you. Karen got into our program." "The design one you were talking about last week?" Kyle asked, enjoying the way Kenny lit up. A smile curved over his lips. "That's awesome. You said she's been trying to get in for 2 semesters now." "She's worked really hard," he said happily, tucking back into his sandwich. "She deserves this. She was so excited." Kyle's smile just about split his face. Karen was the center of Kenny's universe. The boy worked twice as hard to support her, inverted every expectation of him just to prove to his sister that no matter what someone might say to you, They could overcome where they'd come from. Kenny was beyond cool. Kyle had a thought suddenly. I've never seen Karen before, he said, taking another bite of his chicken sandwich. Have a picture? Of course, Kenny said, reaching into his pocket for his phone. He scrolled through the library before turning the phone and sliding it over to Kyle. The girl had brown eyes and brown hair, differing from her brother, but there was something familiar about the face, in the smile, in the slope of the face, the way they looked at the camera. Kenny's arm was around her. Karen was leaning into her brother's hug, beaming. Kyle smiled. You can tell you're related, he mentioned, looking over the picture. She looks very sweet. She's a good kid, Kenny said fervently. She'd think you're cool. Well, I forgive her for her bad judgment, Kyle said, smiling as Kenny choked on his sandwich. Careful, he mentioned, trying not to laugh himself. Cool or not, at least you've got a sense of humor. Kenny congratulated him, and Kyle rolled his eyes with a smile. He pulled his phone out as well, pulling up a recent picture of his baby brother. That's Ike, he said, as Kenny took interest in the phone. That was the day I graduated. He's just a kid, kind of an asshole, but he's great. You said he was smart. Must be a prerequisite of being a Broflovsky. You ended up with the redhead genes, huh? Unfortunately. Kyle had long since resigned to being a ginger, but Ike's actually adopted. He became my brother when he was just a baby. That's cool, Kenny mused, eyes crinkling in a smile. He sent Kyle a sideways, affectionate look. And redheads are cute, Kyle. Kyle kicked him, not enough to actually hurt, turning red in the face as well as the hair. I'm not fishing for compliments, Kenny, he awkwardly reassured. He didn't mean to sound desperate or anything. Kenny's smile warmed into something genuine. And I'm not saying anything not genuine. Kyle's face felt hot. Kenny looked back at the picture again, handing it over when it switched to the next picture. Simply Kyle during the morning graduation pictures with his family. Kenny quickly took it back. Hey! Kyle protested. I've never seen you in a suit. Kenny batted his hands away as he whistled, his eyes twinkling as he teased. Look at you. You're one handsome bastard, Kyle Broflovsky. Shut the fuck up! Kyle hissed, covering his burning cheeks with his hands. That was the wrong thing to say. Kenny's smile turned into a smirk. Oh, God. The first time I saw you, I thought to myself... Kyle was covering his face. Kenny, please. What a damn sexy boy. Kenny gestured with the phone, his expression serious and his eyes sparkling. Intellect and looks and a fire? Yum. I'm going to pitch you over the balcony. Kyle groaned from inside the sanctuary of his hoodie. They can pick you up off the football field. Kenny's seriousness was breaking. He was starting to giggle. Come on, Kyle. You know you're hot. I hate you. Kyle grumbled, lips twitching into a smile. No, you don't. Kyle felt his phone slip under his hand. You think I'm cute too. There, the switch flipped. Kyle's heart jumped. Kenny! This was getting embarrassing fast. Kyle lifted his face, red and teeth grit, and Kenny's expression changed. Oh! The blonde suddenly looked almost scared. Fuck, Kyle, I'm sorry. It's fine, he said, shoving his phone back into his pocket with ferocity. Kenny reached for his hand and squeezed it. Kyle reluctantly glanced at him. No, I'm really sorry, Kenny apologized, looking distraught. I forgot, you're not really used to me yet. I just feels like I've known you for longer than I have, I guess. Something flickered on his face briefly. I get too comfortable. Kyle's face was on fire. It's cool, it's fine, do I come off as desperate or something? Kenny snorted at that, coughing to cover it up. No, you don't. He picked up the hand he was holding, placing a quick kiss on it. I was the one after you, don't forget. If any of us was desperate, it was entirely me. You can make fun of me for it. I'll pass. Kyle just wanted to stop talking about it. This was bringing up memories, and it made him feel a bit sick. Kenny watched him oddly, carefully letting go of his hand. He looked genuinely upset, which made Kyle feel worse. I'm really sorry, Kyle. Stop. He didn't want Kenny kicking himself. Look, it's just, I've been stupid before. I don't like talking about it. The analytical part of Kenny switched on. Kyle saw it as obviously as a physical swap. Blue eyes narrowed, oddly enough making his stomach swoop. I doubt you've ever been stupid, he said, seeming to choose his words carefully. But this has something to do with your villain boyfriend. He's a vigilante, Kyle hissed, heart picking up. His hands felt clammy. And if I say yes, will you leave it alone forever? Kenny watched him, brows furrowed. If you were interested in him, he said cautiously, he probably would have thought himself a lucky weirdo. You're incredible. The Jewish student exhaled shakingly. He stopped talking to me because I was stupid. What? Kenny blurted incredulously. No! Look, you have no idea what happened, Kyle said, words tumbling over themselves in frustration. He was hurt. I was helping him home. He said I wasn't acting professional, and he left. Well, fuck that guy, Kenny said, alarmed. That's on him. No. Kyle dragged his hands over his face. He knew I liked him. Infatuated was the word he used. I just wanted to help. He didn't seem to have anyone. He was hurt. I thought we were friends. He humiliated me. And then he kissed me. Kenny was quiet. Oh God, Kyle wanted to die. He poised himself, uncovering his face with such determined ferocity that his hand slapped the table. I'm sorry, that's probably not what you want to hear. Kyle struggled to think of something to say to someone he was dating-ish while he mentioned kissing city's heroes. Kenny, however, merely looked determined. That, in no way, made you look desperate or weak or anything. He interrupted Kyle with ferocity. Kyle stared. You're allowed to like people, Kyle. I know you. You'd never take advantage of someone or push them into something they didn't want. If he embarrassed you, that was just him being a shitty person. That had nothing to do with how you felt. Let me finish, Kenny said when Kyle tried to interrupt. Please, sweetheart. The endearment caught Kyle off guard and his mouth closed. He wasn't sure how to feel about that. I can picture you so easily being some kind of informant or help or assisting a hero in whatever tasks they have. What I absolutely know is that whatever went down wasn't your fault. He was a jerk for embarrassing you, and the fact he kissed you before disappearing, Kenny shook his head, looking back over the football field, was a dick move. One he has to be seriously regretting. How much of a jackass do you have to be to point out innocent feelings of a friend, take advantage of them by kissing that person, then disappearing from their life altogether so you think it's your fault? That's awful, Kai, but that's not on you. Kyle was again rendered speechless by Kenny's insight. His penchant for the human mind again analyzing Mysterion this time. He went over the words for a while first, quiet. He said we weren't friends, Kyle admitted, trying to find one last fault in Kenny's argument. You probably saved lives on hundreds of occasions with that man, Kenny said, oddly cool. You were at the very least his friend. Why else would he kiss you? Kyle didn't have an answer to that. He'd never been able to come up with a satisfactory, logical answer. He liked you, Kenny thought to himself. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense. You weren't desperate and have nothing to be embarrassed about. Mysterion is an asshole. Not you, not at all. You're allowed to like someone, Kyle. That doesn't make you desperate. What if it were me? He shrugged, lifting a hand. If I liked you, and you pointed out to me, threw it back in my face, told me I wasn't acting professional for just being nice to you, does that make me desperate or you an asshole? Kyle took a moment to digest that. Kenny let him, leaning against the table, barely brushing Kyle's elbow. You know, the older boy's smile was back then, replacing a quiet, irritated look. Makes sense you'd work to make the city a better place, actually. I think you'd actually be a really great hero. Smart, sharp-witted, genuinely good-hearted? Not holding out any secrets on me, are you? No, Kyle said, somewhat dazed. Oddly enough, that did actually make him feel better. To hear he wasn't crazy. That wasn't normal behavior, and it was kind of nonsensical. Dark purples and grays were imprinted in his mind, but they didn't cause the same amount of panic as they had previously. The crushing weight around his ribcage eased. Not that he didn't still feel embarrassed. He started, then changed his mind. Thank you, he said instead, awkwardly. Kenny smiled. I know that was a weird topic to throw at you. Not at all, Kenny said genuinely and reached for Kyle's hand. If something's bothering you, I'd like to help if I can. We're boyfriends at this point, right? He checked with Kyle, who nodded slightly, flushed but pleased. So don't worry. Listen to problems, even if they contain stories of asshole superhero exes. Oh, shut up, Kyle said, but no venom was in it. Kenny leaned over and kissed his cheek. Okay, maybe he hadn't been at fault for the whole fiasco. He was only trying to help after all. He worried about him for ages afterwards. He still checked the media to make sure he was okay. Sightings of him were still reported and such. Kyle gently tugged Kenny back to press a kiss to his lips, leaving the blonde looking surprised, but delighted. He was kind of surprised Kenny was so okay with all this, but it was a little relieving. He took it in with a stride. Thanks, Ken, he said, and Kenny more or less nuzzled up against him. The blonde kindly switched topics back to a safer one, their siblings and ridiculous stories of being kids. Kyle leaned into his side, feeling lighter than he had in ages. Maybe he could start to leave this behind now. One thing that was easier to leave behind for certain was the reason for Mysterion to be throwing things in his face. Leaning against Kenny, Kyle found it hard to believe Mysterion was even on the same level. Yes, he'd been a hero, powerful, strong, resilient, and good, but so was Kenny, and Kenny didn't mind vulnerability. Kenny brought cheer and jokes and lifted Kyle out of something that had bothered him for months, all because he cared about Kyle. Because he didn't like him thinking badly about himself. Kyle listened to his chatter, fingers intertwined with Kenny's.